أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah for the barakat of this Tuesday night, where we gather and seek the wasila of the Ahlul Bayt and learn about their biographies so that inshallah our seeking of their wasila is more powerful than before. We've been talking about our fourth Imam Ali ibn al-Hussain Zain-ul-Abedeen alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Last week we talked more extensively about the period after the Shahadat of Imam Hussain, the period of 34 years of the Imamate of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen, his social impacts and his cultural impacts, and the redevelopment of society in terms of education that our Imam implemented. One of the famous narratives about the Imam is his 34 years was one of oppression, one of, for example, his weakness. And we described this as 34 years of crying, which is very true that he wept for the rest of his life for his father and the tragedies of Karbala and Sham. However, this was not to say that the Imam was not powerful or did not have ability or did not have a nobility in Ijaz that was like the other Aimma alayhimus salam. As a matter of fact, he did. Which is why today I wanted to talk about some of the characteristic points of the Imam that demonstrated through his life that though he had a particular message he intended to impart about the value of the event of Karbala, it in no way was a hindrance from his actual status of being one who represented the Hujjah of Allah, the authority of Allah on this earth, and that the Imam was always the authority of Allah on this earth. Now, I have a few of these narrations that I'll mention that are discussed in some of the various books of Tariq, and are gathered together in a book called Muntaha al-Amal of Sheikh Abbas Qummi, the compiler of Mafati al-Jinan, put together narratives for us about the Ahlul Bayt. Which is why, briefly, some of these points refer to and show the authority of the Imam that he exerted on this earth and lessons for us to learn from. The first of these talks about shortly after the event of Karbala, where people were split in believing in the authority of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen or implying the authority of his uncle, Muhammad Hanafiya. Muhammad Hanafiya is one of the sons of Imam Ali, one of the half-brothers of Imam Hussain, who was not taken to Karbala, who was given a responsibility by Imam Hussain in Medina. And after the event of Karbala, some people mistakenly took to the belief that Muhammad Hanafiya was the Imam of the time. Now, some narrators of history will claim that Muhammad Hanafiya actually believed that he was the Imam. Others say that no, he never said that he was the Imam, that people had this belief, and to remove this belief and doubt from them, that Muhammad Hanafiya and Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen played out a scene for people to recognize the authority of Allah on this earth. The explanation comes and says that when this started to happen, that people believed Muhammad Hanafiya to be the Imam, that Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen and Muhammad Hanafiya proceeded to the precincts of the Kaaba and let the people gather. And when there was a debate amongst the people to see who is the Imam, Muhammad Hanafiya and Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen agreed that both of them should call out to the black stone, and whoever is the Imam of the time, the black stone would answer that person. So sure enough, as the jama'ah of people, the gathering of people inside of the precincts of the Haram, looked on, these two sons of Amir, the grandson of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the grandson of the Prophet, and the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, stood in front of Hajar al-Aswad. Muhammad Hanafiya called out his salam to the Hajar and asked if he is the authority of Allah, and no answer came. Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen stepped forward and said salam to the Hajar, said salam to the black stone, and said, "Oh Hajar al-Aswad, am I, who is the Imam of the time? Who is the Imam after Hussain ibn Ali specifically?" And that they said that we saw the stone move as if it attempted to bow in front of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen, and it called out that certainly Ali ibn al-Hussain is the authority of Allah on this earth. Ali ibn al-Hussain is the authority of Allah on this earth after Hussain ibn Ali, after the sons of Zahra. The purpose of this miracle and its restatement was essentially to show to humanity that may have doubted in the authority of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen that certainly the authority of Allah is this Imam of ours on the earth. His aspect and behavior was unlike that of anyone else, which is why famously one of the stories that's narrated about him is that when a people came to ask about his personality and they wanted to sit with the Imam to narrate his biography to show that he would be the authority of Allah, and they went to his house in Medina and he was not available, he wasn't there. Their journey had to continue, they could not stay for long. So they asked one of the maids of the house who came to answer the door. They said, "Oh, maid of this house, we are about to leave on our journey. We wanted to see Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen. Since we won't be able to meet him, tell us something about him so that we could recognize him or understand his character or understand something about him that would show and teach us more about him." The maid replied and said, "I am that one who has been in his service and never served him food in the daytime and made a bed for him at nighttime." They said, "Maid, this doesn't make any sense to us. What do you mean by this?" She explained and she says, "I have never served him food in the daytime means that there is never a day that goes where he is not fasting. That Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen is majority of his time in a state of fasting." Now, some may say, "Oh, but there's days of Eid and there's times you shouldn't fast." And no, the statement of the maid that I have never made him food in the daytime is to say that generally speaking, the Imam throughout the days would be fasting. And the fact that she said, "I have not made a bed for him in the nighttime," is to say that the nights would be a time which he would generally spend in ibadat and worship of Allah. So that when people are eating and relaxing, the Imam is fasting. And when people are sleeping and relaxing, the Imam is praying. Showing that his grief was not something that overcame his relationship with Allah. Many times we go through difficulties in life. We go through hardships in life. We go through challenges in life. This particular lesson of the Imam is significant for us, and to see him as Zain-ul-Abedeen, the adornment of the worshippers, that in spite of the difficulties in life, the actual satisfaction through difficulty comes through the ibadat and connection with Allah. That to lose that connection is to be overcome by the grief in such a way that we have lost our purpose of creation. And the Imam, by demonstrating in this story, was someone who was never away from Allah in spite of the extremity of the difficulties he experienced in his life. The third of these stories points to a narration and discussion where a man comes to a gathering where Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen is sitting amongst friend and foe, and comes to the Imam and says to him, "Yabna Rasulullah, I'm asking you for help. I have some debts that I need to pay and I have no food in my house. I need from you an amount of money that would satisfy my debts and provide for my family." And the Imam sitting in front of these people says in a very sad fashion, "Oh, I wish that I could help you, but that I don't possess anything at this moment. It would have been great if I could have assisted you, but Allah has not blessed me with, or I don't possess wealth from Allah in this moment." Now, that man who made this request was sitting there and he was listening as some of the enemies of the Imam began to whisper amongst themselves, he calls himself the authority of Allah on this earth, yet he does not possess even enough wealth to satisfy the need of one human being. What kind of an authority of Allah could this be on the earth? They say that after these people left, that man who had made this request sat there still disturbed and upset. And Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen says, "Are you disturbed that I could not meet your request?" And the man replied, "No, Yabna Rasulullah, I'm more upset and disturbed that these people spoke about you in such a way. I'm overcome by anger by this statement." The Imam, in love of this individual, said, "Don't worry, everything will be settled." And he says, "Let me give you something." The Imam calls for a servant who brings 2 pieces of barley bread, 2 loaves or 2 pieces of barley bread. And the Imam says, "This is all of the food that we have in the house. This food was intended for me to eat, but I will give it to you, and inshallah, all of your needs will be met by these 2 pieces of bread." So the man took the bread, but when he held the bread in his hand and he left the company of the Imam, thankful for the mercy of the Imam, he realized that the bread that the Imam was going to eat made of barley was so hard, his children who were at home hungry would have broken their teeth on the bread. So he realizes that I can't eat this bread, I can't feed this bread to my children. Not even one time of food will be able to be taken from this bread. So he proceeds into the market with the hope that maybe he can barter and trade these pieces of bread for something that his family can eat. So first, he goes through a fish seller. As he walks by the markets, he finds a fish seller who has 1 fish left of his entire haul. and nobody will buy the fish from him at any price because it's not a great looking fish. So the man comes to him and he says, you can't seem to sell this fish. How about I trade with you? I will give you this one piece of bread if you give me one fish. And the man thinks to himself, the bread is better than the fish. He gives him the fish and takes the bread. Now he has one piece of fish, and it's not a very pretty piece of fish, though. He continues to walk through the market until he finds a shopkeeper who has sold all of his salt except for what remains at the bottom, that salt of his, which is mixed with mud, and from the ground what has gathered with it. And no one will buy this salt, and this is what's left of his salt. So the man comes to him and says, I'll trade you one loaf of bread for the salt that you have. And in his mind, he's thinking, I won't eat the salt, but what I'll do is I'll rub the salt over the fish. And then when I cook the fish, it'll have some flavor. It's not a very pretty fish, but maybe with some salt, it'll taste better. So sure enough, the guy agrees and he says, fine, this salt is worthless. Nobody will buy it from me. I'll take the loaf of bread. So the man now takes the salt home, takes the fish home, and says, at least I have something I can feed my children for one meal. So he sits down with his children and he says, let's prepare this fish. As he's getting ready to prepare the fish, there's a knock at the door, and the bread seller and the fish seller are standing at his door. He says, why did you come back? They said, when we felt this bread, we realized how hard the bread is, and we realized we couldn't eat the bread. And when we spoke, we realized we both had the same pieces of bread that came from you. And we realized that the reason you gave us this bread is because you have no money. You have no wealth. Otherwise, why would you even possess this bread? So they said, we decided that we can't eat this bread. Our families can't eat this bread. We'll give it back to you in the severity of your poverty, and you can keep the fish and the salt because we realize you're in a difficult situation. So now the man thinks to himself, I have 2 pieces of bread, a fish, and some salt. And he thinks, okay, alhamdulillah, something like this will at least pass for this meal. So he sits with his children, and as he begins to clean the fish, they cut off the head, they open the fish of the body, and inside of the body of the fish are 2 bright pearls of a very large size. And he looks at the incredible amount of wealth that they found in the fish. As he finds this wealth, a knock comes at his door again, and it's one of the servants of the house of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen. And the servant says, Allah has met your needs through the wasila of the Imam. Now return his bread to him, because certainly none of you can eat this bread except for the Imam himself. So the Imam says, don't waste this bread, give it back to me. Because again, someone who's in a state of desperation will eat anything. But all of a sudden, this man found himself in a condition where he's no longer desperate. He can sell the pearls, make some money, and have good food in his house. So instead of wasting this bread, the Imam says, return my bread to me. They describe and say that eventually this man became incredibly wealthy. He became a very good businessman, and he was a very pious man. And he would often tell people, it is by the barakat of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen that I achieved this status, that I achieved this position, such that those who were the enemies of the Imam would be astonished to say, Ali ibn al-Hussain keeps such a simple life. How did he give so much money to make this man wealthy enough that his needs are met? Which brings us to the next of our stories that talks about the status of the Imam in terms of being the authority of Allah on this earth. There's a story that talks about a lady by the name of Habbaba al-Walibiyya. Habbaba al-Walibiyya was a lady who was present in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. She says, I would follow Ali ibn Abi Talib because I would see in him a mastery of both language and behavior, and I would learn from him. Eventually, one time in the city of Kufa, Habbaba says, I went to ask Imam Ali when he was sitting in Masjid Kufa. I asked him, Oh Ali ibn Abi Talib, how do I know someone is the Imam of the time? What is the proof of your Imamat of the time? She says, Imam Ali turned and looked around and said, there was a stone on the ground. He said, bring that stone to me. So Habbaba went and collected a stone, brought it to Imam Ali. Imam Ali took his ring and put his ring on the stone, and the seal of the Imam's ring became impressed upon the stone permanently. And it was one of the mu'jizat of the Imam. That if I take something and I place it on a stone, how does the stone take its impression without heat, without pressure, without anything? simply the Imam putting it on. Imam Ali gave me Hababa that stone, and he said, "Oh Hababa, whoever is the authority of Allah on this earth can place his seal upon this stone for you to know that they are the Imam of the time." Hababa says, after the daughter of Imam Ali, I went to Imam Hassan. He placed his mark on the stone. I went to Imam Hussain. He gave me gifts and placed his mark on this stone. She says, when the time of Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen came, I was 113 years old. I went to Ali ibn al-Hussein to see if he would give me the mark of his seal on my stone as well too, to have the proof of his imamat. And I found him so busy in prayer, I waited for some time, but my energy was gone, and I did not think I would be able to achieve this goal of receiving this mark from Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen. She says, as suddenly as I began to despair, the Imam pointed his finger at me, and it was as if my youth returned to me. And then the Imam motioned for me to come close, and it was very easy for me to go to Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen. He took from me the stone and put the mark of his seal upon that stone like his fathers before him. I said, Yabna Rasulullah, may I ask you a question? He says, what is your question, Hababa? She says, how much of my life has passed and how much of my life remains? She says that Ali ibn al-Hussein said to me, of what remains, I cannot tell you, but what has passed, I will tell you. And this is why we know for a fact 113 years of her life had passed at this time. She says, after the meeting with Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen, I lived long enough and I received the mark from Imam al-Baqir, from Imam al-Sadiq, from Imam al-Kadhim, and the final mark that she received from Imam al-Radha, proving his imamah at that time. This story of Hababa and her long life and her association with the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt, from the one aspect, is a demonstration that the authority of the Imam was not hidden, and the Imam revealed his authority in spite of his difficulties. The other is a characteristic that's not often talked about, that Hababa was an alima, was a scholar of the religion of Islam and a teacher of society and people, which is why her words and her communication with Ahlul Bayt is authenticated and accepted. That even amongst the women, there is a need for knowledge, and the Imam supported that knowledge and ensured that the authority of that knowledge was present amongst the people, which is why each would give her their seal, so as to show that she had an affiliation with the Ahlul Bayt, and that they had endorsed her character, that they would still continue to interact with her directly, and her life was a mu'jiza of the barakat of Ahlul Bayt, and khusus in that aspect, that after 113 years, she says, my youth was returned to me by the motion of Ali ibn al-Hussein. These examples were not the only ones that showed the authority of the Imam on this earth. Rather, the Imam was someone whose authority was never overcome, even by the enemies of Islam. Imam al-Baqir narrates a story about a time. He says, my father went to the house of Allah alone, and as he was traveling, he passed through a desolate valley with no one with him. He was traveling alone within a valley, which means an enclosed place where others from a distance could not see what was going on inside. He describes, and he says, when my father entered this valley, a robber came up to him and said to him, give me everything you have, give me your mount. Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen said to him, what is it that you desire from me? He said, I desire to kill you and take all of your possessions from you. The Imam said, let me give you my possessions and give you wealth myself. Will that not satisfy you? And the robber said, I will not be satisfied. Give me everything you have. Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen then said, then leave me enough of this wealth that I may survive and I may leave this place and reach my destination. The robber said, I have no desire to leave you even that much. I will give you nothing and I will take everything. The Imam says, where is your Lord? Have you no fear of him? And the man, as if taunting Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen, he laughed and said, my Lord is sleeping. He does not see what I do. As he said this, two lions jumped out at this man, and one grabbed the man by the head, one grabbed him by the feet, and they immediately pulled him apart and ate him. And the Imam replied, he says, this is your fault for not believing in the authority of your Lord, that now your Lord has shown you his authority is absolute and he is constantly aware of you. Meaning the Imam was somebody who, regardless of all the difficulties, had such jalal and authority, had such power and such position that the enemies of Allah could not compete with him. even though we may know our Imam to be one who grieves for Ahlul Bayt, who grieves for Imam Hussain, it did not diminish anything of his authority on this earth. So why the final story comes about in interaction between Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who was the Khalifa of the time, and Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen. A person by the name of Zuhri narrates that Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, at one time who was the Khalifa of the Arab Empire, of the empire, sent his guards and said, imprison and bring to me Ali ibn al-Hussein in the worst of conditions. So the soldiers of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan went to Medina, took Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen and captured him in chains, and again put him on the back of a camel and began to take him to the city of Sham again. Zuhri narrates and he says, as the Imam had left the city of Medina and had been 2 days of journey, I came upon the Imam and I asked the guards to speak to their prisoner and they allowed me. When I went to Ali ibn al-Hussein to speak to him, I began to cry. And Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen said, Zuhri, what makes you cry? Zuhri replies, he says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, it's your condition in these chains again that I cannot bear. It is your condition in this difficulty that I cannot bear. Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen turns and he says, oh Zuhri, do you think this is beyond our capacity? No. Zuhri says, in that instance, Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen immediately took off the chains as if it was nothing and put them on the side. And he said, don't worry, I will leave this condition very quickly. Zuhri became silent and overcome by the authority, the haybat of the Imam. He narrates and he says, the next day, I saw these same soldiers traveling, but now with no prisoner. Zuhri says, I went to those soldiers and I asked them, what happened? They said, last night we stopped our journey with our prisoner. This morning, we went to go look for him. We couldn't find him. The chains were there, things were there, but the prisoner was completely gone. We don't know where to look for him. Do we go back to Medina? Do we go to Sham? We don't know what to do. Zuhri left them. And eventually, at one point in time, when he proceeded to Sham, he met Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Khalifa of the time. And he reported to the Khalifa this incident that he had seen. And on the third day, he described and said that the soldiers were without the prisoner and they didn't know where he went. Zuhri says, as I told Abdul Malik ibn Marwan this story, Abdul Malik continued the story. He says that third day that he disappeared, he showed up at my door in Sham. Zuhri says, really? Abdul Malik says, yes. Zuhri says, then what happened? He says, Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen began to speak to the Khalifa and he said, oh, Abdul Malik, what do we have to do with each other? What is your interest in me? Abdul Malik says, I became afraid of his speech, but I said to him, I wanted you close to me, so therefore I sent for you, without acknowledging the kind of character with which he sent his soldiers. Abdul Malik says, when I said this to him, he replied, I have nothing to do with you and I don't want to be here. I will not be here. And he turned and he left me in that condition and returned to Medina. Zuhri says, Abdul Malik narrated, he says, after the Imam left, Abdul Malik says, I went to the bathroom and I realized I had peed and pooed myself in fear of the appearance of the Imam. And he says, after that, I never bothered Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen again. This type of character of the Imam is not one that's often discussed. But never imagine that the Imam, na'uzubillah, was incapable. None of our Imams were incapable. Our Imams were perfect in every aspect of their personality, in every time of their personality. If we see the Imam representing a particular character, if we see the Imam representing particular traits in society, it's because society needed to note those traits to learn a particular lesson to apply in the rest of their life. Today, if, for example, we see the majlis of Imam Hussain, we see the grief of Imam Hussain as a part of our character in life, it's because of the lesson that Imam Zain-ul-Abedeen taught us, not, na'uzubillah, that the Imam had nothing else to do except for this. So therefore, these lessons should be a point for us to learn the depth of character and perfection of the Imam, that though there may be a story that's famous about the Imam, it doesn't mean that's the only attribute of the Imam that existed. The Imam had power. The Imam had authority. The Imam had the recognition of the world under his hands, the responsibility to the world under his hand, and he was capable of solving all of these issues. If it was that he portrayed a particular character, it was so that you and I would not neglect or confuse this attribute with others and would give it preference and give it direction and meaning in our life. It was this authority of the Imam, this teaching of the Imam, that eventually led the Dhalimeen, the oppressors of the time, to poison our Imam and to bring an end to his life. And thus we saw 34 years of his imamate, though they may have been ones that were punctuated with the grief of Abu Abdullah, they were also filled with many other lessons of the absolute authority of Allah, of Allah's authority on this earth, the Hujjah of Allah on this earth. May Allah give us the tawfiq to learn more about our Ahlul Bayt, to follow the examples of Ahlul Bayt, and to be amongst those who are the true followers and servants of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. We raise our hands in dua. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد، يا أعلى بحق علي، يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, by the right of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, by the right of this Tuesday night, oh Allah, keep us connected to the Ahlul Bayt. Ya Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the right of those who are the authority of Allah on this earth, fulfill our hajat. By the right of those who are the authority of Allah on this earth, cure our sick. By the right of the authority of Allah on this earth, give protection to the mu'mineen wherever they are on this earth. Keep our children on the upright path of Ali Muhammad. Give us tawfiq to learn about the lives of Ali Muhammad. Hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time and make us from the upright supporters of the Imam. We finish this with remembering all of our marhumeen, with one Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, with salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله